Coffee with the Editor is proudly brought to you by IRZ and the Railway Safety Regulator, RSR.
So Tshepo, thank you so much for joining me here at your annual Rail Safety.
It's a pleasure, Philippa.
Thanks for hosting Railways Africa. An impromptu coffee with the editor session here at your event. We'll do it again, when we're back in Joburg. You launched the State of Safety report yesterday. What for you has been the most standout?
The way we've approached the state of safety this year, we did the year-on-year comparison, which we've done in the past, but we also went on to do a trend analysis so that we get a sense of how we've been performing over the years. While in a number of areas there's an improvement in terms of the year-on-year comparison, but looking at the trend, we do see some concerning statistics in terms of how the statistics are coming out. We looked at from 2010-11 up until today, and in various areas there's obviously issues that concern us. For me, the most important one, which I will link to some of the activities that we are trying to do, when we look at the SPADs, signal past danger, we see an increase in that area. And what it is telling us is that we are very close to having collisions. And therefore, even in the messaging we're giving to operators, particularly Transnet as well as PRASA, is in ensuring that there's mitigation strategies for that. And that's an area we believe that they need to start watching. The other area, which is, I think for me, the main concern is around security. There's a marked increase in security occurrences or incidents, and you will see that, but I think that's reflective of the country. If you look at the sub-statistics and you look at what is coming out of the state of safety, there's almost a correlation. But obviously there's a lot around theft of assets, vandalism, and I think we've all experienced it. We've all felt it through signals that weren't working in the last year. And I think you'll be aware that there was a lot of activity between ourselves and PRASA. And we almost sort of narrowed our activities and our focus with PRASA on those areas.
I think we have less rolling stock on the network.
Yeah.
And I think we have less activity in terms of the number of trains moving every
Train
day.
kilometers have dropped.
So if you took those statistics and put the number of incidents, it's actually increased if you consider how.
Yes, and in fact,
my thinking is correct.
Yeah, your thinking is quite correct, and in fact, that's why we then did a trend analysis over a period of time. While we've seen a decrease in train kilometers from both sides, from both operators and tonnages. You've seen increase in tonnages on the Transnet side, but the train kilometers have certainly dropped. And you've seen a decrease on the PRASA side as well. However, your occurrences continue to go up, and that is a real challenge, I think, that requires, it means then we are a lot more unsafe because we're traveling fewer distances, but we're actually experiencing a bit more. So you are quite correct in saying that.
Okay. So in your opinion, when the PRASA modernization program actually kicks in, so the signaling projects are complete, the new trains are put in, do you think we'll see a shift in culture and attitude?
That's a difficult one because culture is changed through a number of things. Just putting in the correct infrastructure doesn't necessarily change everything. If you think about it, if the issues are non-compliance with standard operating procedures, even when you do have improved infrastructure, unless it forces you to stop, you will still see that culture permeating through, and therefore the same risks remain within the network. So to that extent, I don't think that the modernization in itself, just the infrastructure modernization in itself, will actually change. Every time I talk about the issues around occurrences, I've always made a point to emphasize the fact that when you see an occurrence, that's just the symptom of a much bigger problem. There's a systemic issue, which started off with a lack of a proper safety management system for a certain operator, and obviously safety culture is part of that, of developing that system for safety management. And therefore, unless you actually change the culture deliberately, because I think you have to be deliberate about it. We've seen it in the mining industry, where because of the pressure that came from the unions, from government and all of that, the mining sector have actually made it a point that they at least are trying to improve their safety record. And I think you need that sort of commitment within the rail industry to be able to turn the curve.
So this morning we heard from Simon from the UIC, International Union of Rail, but he had some quite interesting statistics. What was your kind of key takeaway from that?
Of course, their network is a lot safer, even in terms of just the numbers. But I think the point to emphasize is that while we are having challenges even in South Africa in terms of the number of occurrences, but rail is still the safer mode, road-based mode of transport. So we are still performing far better than our road counterparts. And I think because that was, for me, one of the key things that Simon brought out. But actually, even in terms of modernization, it's easy to think that Europe has so developed and they wouldn't have the type of troubles we have around interoperability, in terms of different technologies. And I actually think that we are in a far better space as South Africa to be able to even embrace the fourth industrial revolution, because we don't actually have the sort of legacy problems, or at least not at the same magnitude, in terms of changing technology and that sort of thing. In a lot of areas, we would be introducing that technology for the first time. I mean, if you consider our network system and the signaling environment that you have, you've got like very old infrastructure. But I think what is important maybe for operators is that even as we modernize, we shouldn't forget the maintenance part, because we are so focused on the new trains, in fact, running an efficient system is more than just the train, is also being able to maintain it, ensuring that it is on time, at the right time when it's required. So availability and efficiency of and punctuality, of course, for the rail system, because when there's a delay, the knock-on effects, which go all the way back and have safety implications, is an area that obviously the regulator is concerned about.
So I thought it was quite interesting because, you know, similarities between Europe and South Africa, I thought Africa, sorry, were quite similar, you know, different gauges.
Yes,
and really the same challenges.
And I suspect Europe might be even harder when you actually look at the number of the different gauges that they have. Whereas in sub-Saharan Africa, while you do have an extensive narrow gauge network in South Africa and maybe Southern Africa, the rest of the continent, from a rail perspective, does not have such an established network. And therefore, you're likely to have challenges with just two main different types, your narrow gauge and the standard gauge, because everybody else is developing there. But I think that poses a real challenge for South Africa, given the extent of our network, given our ports and their function in regional integration. So it is important that we enable our landlocked neighbors, as part of our commitment to regional integration, to be able to still have that interface between themselves and our network, because I think most of them are actually going standard gauge.
Technology. I mean, your theme for this year, safety and fourth industrial revolution. What aspect is exciting?
Put that alongside the modernization project. And because PRASA's impact is on commuters and ensuring that people have access, for me, the excitement is knowing that if we were to embrace it, we would be able, as PRASA, because I now talk about the sector, not necessarily for the RSR, and PRASA would be able to improve the service to their customers. If you understand the importance of that in gaining access to opportunities for work, health facilities, and all of that, as they always say, transport is the backbone, and I think actually rail would actually make a huge difference in doing that. But the concerns remain. There doesn't seem to be integration between PRASA and Gautrain. Even at a station level, you actually have to leave one station in order to get to the other station. And as we then develop further, maybe those are some of the areas we need to look at. The area of signaling, it has been a concern for the regulator, and in fact a source of most of the frustrations and maybe our sort of engagement with PRASA is the fact that we are finally at a stage where we can introduce the modern system, because what we currently have simply isn't.
What are your thoughts on autonomous, driverless trains?
Obviously the impact, and I think one of the questions we had as part of the panel related to the banking sector and the job losses that are there. So it does come with that you may just end up, you will likely lose jobs. But therefore what then becomes very important in my view is to ensure that we reskill with the right skills, and ensuring that all the people involved in the sector are able to then be skilled properly to be able to participate within the digital era.
I don't think it would take the job away. I think it
changes the nature of the job.
Changes
the nature of the job.
And I think you're quite right in terms of the skill and retraining. But I think it would also bring in a whole new, I would call it an emotional attachment.
Dimension,
and
a whole new dimension to the work of a driver.
Yes.
But also it would require for us to actually look at what are the sort of competencies, I don't know if I can call them that, what sort of skills or skill requirements would a driver need to have. I am aware that in Europe, to be a driver, there's, you do certain aptitude assessments and all of that. So it would require that we do exactly the same, but we also ensure that the network itself, every time people talk about smart mobility or smart cities, I always say that everything has to be able to talk. So just automating the vehicle alone is not enough. You actually have an entire network that then needs to be smart and responsive to all of that. But obviously even the people that are managing that system would have to be able to embrace it and therefore properly skilled for it.
So I was looking at your career journey, and I think you could be our next Minister of Transport.
No.
Give it a few more years.
No.
Why not?
No. I think.
Sub-Saharan Africa Transport Policy Program.
Yeah.
You've worked with the World Bank.
Yeah.
You worked on the infrastructure PIDA.
Yeah.
And that in
PIDA,
itself is quite an exciting program.
Yeah.
Trans-Africa Highways. I mean, you understand the relationship between road and rail.
Yeah.
I mean, that's quite impressive.
Thank you. I think I was, in fact, I always say to most people that I've worked in a lot of places, African Union was by far the most interesting, exciting part of my career, because it was just such a move out of where I came from. I'd been working for consulting firms up until then. And actually going there helped me also get an appreciation of the continent as a whole. So I'm very passionate about Africa's development. Getting involved in PIDA at that very early stage, because at the time it was at a conceptual phase. So we were still doing a whole host of studies and trying to conceptualize the whole process with the African Development Bank. So yes, I think I've been fortunate enough to actually, and I've traveled the continent extensively, which was maybe one of the most exciting parts of my career.
And I see something on here that is starting to make headlines, which is the Trans-Kalahari Corridor.
Yep.
So hopefully we'll see.
Yes, we'll
tracks
see
there
that.
soon.
Yeah, we'll see that. Obviously, there are challenges around, and I think with economies struggling at the moment, there are challenges around ensuring that there's enough funding for infrastructure, and rail infrastructure is quite expensive in its form. And the Trans-Kalahari, I think there are some, the distance between the ports and obviously the mines in Zambia and that sort of thing. So there are some limitations, but I think it's at the time, I mean, when I was working on it, it was looking at how to actually improve efficiencies around the corridor and a few other corridors around the continent.
Well, we should see some movement there. So thank you very much for your time.